Yo guys, this is Jared, aka the Saint of Sins on Xbox Live, and I know it's been a long time since you've heard these words, but this is another edition of MLB Thoughts, coming at you very late. Before I get into this edition, I've got to apologize for my long hiatus from these videos. I just fell into a dark place and my heart really wasn't into it anymore. In a lot of ways, I'm still struggling with this entire process. I just haven't been happy with the production of my videos, and I'm not sure I'll ever be happy with my videos. But that may just be the perfectionist in me. For those of you wondering what's been going on with my predictions, I have been posting them up regularly on Twitter in my absence here. And that was also one of the big debates I had with myself about this series, whether or not I wanted to continue using this platform to promote my predictions. I'm a bit iffy on that because I feel it takes up way too much portion of the videos. So I'm going to be experimenting a little bit with this series from now on in terms of keeping the predictions on the videos, but in more of a visual fashion. I'll also continue to be tweeting them out every day as I have been for the past month and a half. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump into today's edition. There has certainly been a lot that I've missed over the past month during my hiatus. Most notably would be the All-Star voting. I have personally been against the fan voting for decades now, and this year seems to be the tipping point for me. Last year, the fans had done a much better job than I had anticipated, but this year was absolutely horrendous. Before I get into this year's rosters, I first have to explain how the selection process works, because a lot of people seem to think that La Russa is holding a grudge from beyond the managerial career. That couldn't be any further from reality if it was written, directed, and starring Tommy Wiseau. The fact of the matter is this: the players, managers, and coaches got to vote for the majority of the reserves and pitchers. La Russa and Washington only got to pick a handful of players to both go on the reserves and the final vote. As can be found on MLB.com's breakdown of the All-Star rosters, linked to the article in the description box down below, La Russa ended up picking Carlos Ruiz, Ian Desmond, Jay Bruce, Giancarlo Stanton, Cole Hamels, Clayton Kershaw, Wade Miley, Jonathan Papelbon, and Houston Street. As per the rules, at least one representative of each team had to be on the roster. His selection ensured a representative for the Marlins, the Diamondbacks, and the Padres. In contrast, Ron Washington's selections were Joe Mauer of the Minnesota Twins, Elvis Andrus of the Texas Rangers, Billy Butler of the Kansas City Royals, Ryan Cook of the Oakland Athletics, Matt Harrison of the Rangers, Felix Hernandez of the Seattle Mariners, and Joe Nathan of the Rangers. Of his 7 selections, Washington picked 3 of his own team members. This after it was already announced that through fan voting, 3 of his team members would be on the starting roster. And just to place one more Goomba stomp to the testicles, Ron Washington's selection for the final vote was Yu Darvish. I truly hope this is all starting to sink in, because if it hasn't, let me just break it down for you. The Rangers are sending 3 of its players via fan vote to be starting for the American League team. They had 1 team member going in via the player balloting in Ian Kinsler. Because of their performance last season to end up at the World Series, Ron Washington is going to be the manager for the American League team once again. And he had 7 selections, and of those 7, 3 of those players were from his own team. And he got to put in another team member of his on the final vote, giving them a potential chance of having 8 total players on the roster. But despite all of that, the majority of the complaints that I had seen and heard were focused upon Tony La Russa snubbing the Cincinnati Reds, somehow holding a grudge for something that happened 2 years ago. And we didn't even start touching upon my main complaint about this year's All-Star Game voting: the fan voting and the ballot stuffing that went on not only for the Texas Rangers, but for the San Francisco Giants. If this isn't a clear indication to Major League Baseball that they just need to take away fan voting or in some way change fan voting so that way this sort of ballot stuffing never happens again, I don't know what will. Yeah, I know I sound a little crazy, but if you haven't seen any of the numbers behind the fan votes, you might not be aware of what I'm talking about. Let's start off with one of my biggest pet peeves. Voting for injured players who haven't seen more than a month of play during the regular season. We'll begin with a look at the National League, simply because they had the most egregious examples of this. First on my chopping block of undeserving All-Stars this season, the Los Angeles Dodgers center fielder and possible National League MVP candidate, if he ever returns, Matt Kemp. Ever since his breakout party last season, it seems as though he's become far more popular, so much so that everyone has been focused in on him going into this season. But what heightened all the press around him was how strong a month of April he had. He was putting up MVP caliber numbers yet again and looked like he could accomplish a feat that hadn't been obtained in nearly 60 years. The National League batting triple crown. But here's the problem. Kemp only managed to play 36 games all season long. So as nice as his numbers looked back in May, it doesn't mean anything. By contrast, Kemp's teammate Andre Ethier played in more games and his numbers were already starting to surpass Kemp's. In the end, Ethier played almost double the amount of games that Kemp did, has almost far superior numbers in many categories simply because he's played in more games. Why wasn't he the more clear candidate from the Dodgers? In the end, Matt Kemp would end up with 5,462,757 votes, allowing him to edge out Ryan Braun, who had 5,355,752 votes. Andre Ethier would finish with over 2.5 million votes and finish in 9th place in the voting. Now, as bad as I feel it is for Matt Kemp to be starting in the All-Star game, especially when you take into consideration how many tremendous options were available for the National League outfield, it's nowhere near as bad as some of the other examples I'm about to provide, such as Pablo Sandoval edging out David Wright for the starting position at third base. Sandoval is another guy that spent considerable amount of time on the disabled list this year. He missed almost all of May, but unlike Kemp, Sandoval's popularity isn't high enough to carry him through this process. Instead, he and his other teammates enjoyed the process being skewed in their favor, as Giants fans made a late push in the voting to try and stack as many of their team players on the All-Star game. One such Giant player to benefit the most from this process without having played a single game all season long has been Freddie Sanchez. As a matter of fact, Sanchez hasn't played a game since June 10th, 2011, yet somehow he managed to finish 4th in voting with 2,289,147 votes. Not only did he beat out Ricky Weeks, he also beat out Chase Utley, another guy that didn't play a single game during the season prior to the fan vote ending on June 28th. And if you still don't believe me that this entire process is corrupt and needs to be changed in some way, then you explain to me how Brandon Crawford finished out second in the shortstop votes with 3,666,897 votes when he entered June 28th with a batting average of .233, with a slug of .326, an OPS of .609, with only 1 home run, 21 RBIs, and 19 runs. That's almost the entire gist of his stat line. He excels at almost no stat worthy of making the All-Star team, yet he managed to finish out second in the shortstop vote, coming 306,024 votes shy of tying Rafael Furcal. Worse yet, Brandon Belt of the Giants also finished second in the first base vote. He finished ahead of Lance Berkman, Freddie Freeman, and another disabled list member, Ryan Howard. Let's just put this into context. Brandon Belt, after June 27th, was going into the final day of voting with a batting average of .259, a slug of .432, an OPS of .808, with 4 home runs, 29 RBIs, and 17 runs. He wasn't leading the league in any of these categories, nor was he leading first baseman in these categories for the National League. At least for the American League, when Jacoby Ellsbury fell on the disabled list, his momentum in the vote died, as he would finish 17th in the voting. But leave it to the National League fans to mostly get it wrong. And of course, the players, managers, and coaches don't get a free pass here simply because their votes weren't any better. One of the problems with their selections, apparently their voting process ended 2 weeks prior to the fans' vote ending. That's a problem. And their flubs couldn't have been any more noticeable even if they had tried to highlight them for all of us to see. I'm sorry, someone explain to me what CC Sabathia is doing on this team when Jake Peavy was left off the list. As a matter of fact, why did Jake Peavy have to get on this team via the final vote? Why wasn't he a more automatic decision to put on the team's roster right off the bat while Sabathia sits on the outside looking in, trying to get in through the final vote? Because looking at their numbers, Peavy is the clear choice here. You know what? As much as I could continue to go on about all of the flaws and not just the selections but the process, I think I'll just stick on picking on the process. Because there's nothing that can be done about the selections anymore. The final vote has been cast, the game will be on tomorrow, the rosters are already filled out, all of the reserves have been named, and the only thing left to do is sit back, relax, and enjoy what should be an overall entertaining event. So instead, I'll just close out by saying this. Perhaps taking away the vote entirely from the fans wouldn't be the wisest of decisions. After all, this game is meant to entertain them, and if they don't have a say in who's playing, then odds are they're not going to watch. Though, they still aren't watching all that much now when they do have almost entire control of the roster. But that's besides the point. Perhaps the simplest and best solution to all of this is Major League Baseball trimming the fat on the voting process. Instead of opening it up in April, they should open it up in late May. In addition to this, players should be able to qualify to end up on the ballot, meeting certain requirements on the season. For example, a set number of at-bats for everyday players and a set number of innings pitched for starters. I know I just mentioned pitchers and fans never vote on that position, but I think for moving forward, the fans should probably get the vote on who starts the game. In addition to that, while this voting process for the fans is going on, the players, managers, and coaches should all be able to vote up until the very last moment alongside with the fans. This would prevent any more cries about how guys like Lance Lynn are getting in over guys like Johnny Cueto. But it's likely we'll have to wait for the next negotiations in 2 years for this to actually start coming across in the discussions, because the CBA in place this year was agreed upon at the end of last season. So with all of that, that's going to do it for this edition of MLB Thoughts. I will see you guys later. Peace.